In the last episode, I said that we should just burn it down. Was I being too harsh? Was there something that can be saved within Shambhala? So, in the last episode, we talked about. I went over a report from a criminal case that is taking place in Vermont. I said civil case, and someone corrected me on that. So, please definitely double check any little details like that if that's something that makes a difference to you. But obviously, that doesn't change the material that was in that report. Um, and I did sort of use a little bit of harsh language when I kept saying burn it down. I didn't mean that literally, right? I didn't mean that you should go and burn down the buildings. Raise your hand if that's what you thought I meant. Be honest. Be honest. Did you think I meant to go and burn down the buildings? That many of you? Really? I didn't mean it literally. But what I did mean was that I don't feel like there's anything in Shambhala that can be saved or resurrected. And I wanted to talk a little bit about why. So in the last episode, I said that it was going to sort of preempt my original idea of talking about Shambhala culture sort of from my own perspective, because it kind of tied into what was in that report. And I realized after doing it that I still need to talk about it more. I need to talk about Shambhala culture more. One reason for that is because that report ends when my Shambhala experience began. And the question of have things changed keeps coming back. You see it on Reddit. People say, I've heard about what's going on, but I heard that things are better. And then someone will make a comment and say something like, oh yes, Shambhala has separated completely from the Sakyong and everyone has apologized for all their bad deeds and now everything is fine, or something along those lines. My contention is that's not possible, actually. And I'd love to hear you guys tell me why I'm wrong or why you agree with me in the comments. Is Shambhala redeemable? Is the question that we have for today. And, I want to talk more about the culture and kind of roll back a little bit into my own experience and talk about some things that have come to my attention since I made that video. Because every time I make a video, I hear from more and more people. And it's interesting because a lot of these people don't want me to share their story. They don't want me to use their name or read it to anyone. They stand to gain nothing, basically, from sharing their story with me. They stand to gain nothing by amplifying my voice, by encouraging me to do this. There's just no benefit. But what they do gain oftentimes is just being able to say their story out loud or in writing, to share it with somebody else and to have somebody recognize that. And it's a very personal kind of non-public, no material gain kind of situation. And, since I wrote that, or since I did that last video, I've again heard from 3 or 4 more people with some fairly serious stories. On a personal note, I have been not super well. I've had to have 2 kind of minor surgical procedures in the last 2 weeks, and I have another one coming up this Wednesday, so that is why I haven't made a video in a little while, and it might be a little slow going forward, but I have a lot of stuff in mind, and I feel like I'm just going to have to get these out a little bit at a time. That video was also emotionally very, very draining for me. When I talk about myself, it's a little bit easier, but when I'm talking about other people's suffering and the way that they were harmed, it really makes me more angry. I don't know why that is. Anyhow, so a little note, just a little reminder about the channel, folks. I need to say this again because I keep getting emails where people sort of want to correct my tone or something like that. And I just want to explain that if you watch just one video and you don't like my tone, just wait until the next one or another couple videos later. The reason for that is that, as I said, and I think this bears repeating, this is like the research phase of the channel. As I go through these things, I'm actually remembering a lot of these things in real time as I talk about them. And I know there's a certain set of things that I need to talk about in order to lay some kind of a groundwork of understanding. And that's just in order for me to figure out what I really need to talk about. And a factor that I didn't expect in having this channel was the number, how much I was going to hear from other people. I knew I would hear from people, but I didn't realize how much it would affect me. So it's also changing my perspective as I go. So I want you to keep that in mind when I use one tone or another, or if I can express an opinion, because honestly, you may find me contradicting myself 2 months from now, given something that I said that I may have changed my mind. And that's just sort of the way this is. So this is, like I said, phase 2 of the channel, the research phase. And I think I'm starting to understand the things that I want to talk about. And it's very frustrating to me that I don't have the words yet to fully explain what it is that I'm thinking. So this one's going to be a little bit of a mishmash today, and we'll see how it goes. But I want to go back first to my early experience. Actually, I'm going to skip to the end, and then I'm going to go to the early experience. But near the end of my time in Shambhala, when I was at Casa Werma, I started to have kind of a change of heart about aspects of the Shambhala culture. When I was young, when I was 21 and 22 and 25, like the whole sort of like casual sex, drinking culture was, it's fun. It was a good time. It seemed like a good time. And it certainly didn't seem to be damaging personally. Also, most of the time that I spent in Shambhala, I was either like completely single and like didn't have anything to do with a woman, or I was in a relationship. Like for 90% of my time in Shambhala, it was like feast or famine in that way. I was either in a committed relationship or I was totally single. And there was one exception, which was the year that I was on the road with the Sakyong, which is somewhat telling. And you can really run up the score in a situation like that. But so I wasn't actually engaged in sort of the really promiscuous aspects of things, but I definitely played into the whole like smarmy, sexy kind of vibe that was just there all the time. And you hear this a lot, sort of Trungpa's sex jokes and metaphors that he used all the time during his talks. And yeah, it's a bunch of like, he's in his 30s, everybody is in their 20s, or he's in his 40s and everybody's in their 20s. It's like, yeah, you're young. Okay, there's a little, and it was the 70s. So there's a little bit of that sort of is understandable. But that actually raises an interesting question because, the whole thing with Shambhala was that like it was supposed to be different, right? That Trungpa was something different and that he had some radically different culture to offer to people. But then the excuse for the behavior is, well, it was the 70s and everybody was doing that. So which is it? Right? Which is it? Were you an alternative to the culture, or were you doing what everybody else was doing? Or was it both? Or was it neither? And so that one, right? Is it this? Is it that? Is it both? Is it neither? That's the nature of the bullshit that makes it impossible for Shambhala to be reformed. And I'm going to try to explain this as best as I can. You're going to have to use a little bit of your own experience. Think about a time when somebody asked a question and couldn't get a straight answer. Now, I went through way back in, I think it was episode 9 of the Talking About Shambhala series. It was 8 or 9 when I was talking about the community meeting where people just like went in bullshit circles in order to avoid actually addressing the issue at hand. And that's the nature of the problem. So if you look at the teachings, they can't be nailed down, right? And that's the nature of the teachings, right? When they talk about the Madhyamaka, they talk about the great middle way, and sometimes they like to say, not even the middle way, and the idea is everything is beyond concept. And then so you get things like, does it exist? Does it not exist? Does it both exist or not exist? Or does it neither exist nor not exist? And the answer is none of those. So then you're supposed to be left with this woo kind of non-conceptual moment and whatever. But there's a problem here, is that you can't define anything. You can't define anything. There are no boundaries. There are no clear boundaries. And that's what now people are trying to do in Shambhala, is that they're trying to recreate the situation that they had prior to the scandals and somehow create boundaries. But it's actually impossible in the context of the culture because you can't get a straight answer about anything. Like ask a senior teacher whether or not the protectors are real or whether the dralas are real. And then watch what happens. Just watch the discussion that you wind up having. You'll never be able to nail anything down. And for those of you who are wondering, they pretty much are like little blue men, little white men, little whatever color, blue, red, whatever. I don't know what color the dralas are generally, but I remember being at Kalapa Assembly in 2000, Jeremy Hayward giving this impassioned kind of rant about how the Dorje Drodel was explicit about the fact that you could meet the Dralas face to face in person, and they were just waiting to meet you. So this is, of course, sprung on you much, 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 much later. But then when you ask questions about like Vajrayogini or the Yiram, they start to play with this, this phenomenal versus noumenal. Is it an expression of your mind, or is it something that can manifest physically? Can an expression of your mind manifest physically? And blah, 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 blah. And there's a reason why it's that way. Because then you can get out of anything. You can talk your way out of anything. It's what we call sophism. It's pseudo-logic. It sounds plausible, and it just goes in circles. And this is kind of how the entire thing is. And I find this actually quite fascinating. There's so much to sort of unpack here because there probably is some wisdom within Shambhala, right? There's a reason why I don't talk about the good times, and I may actually do a video about that. But there's probably some actual wisdom there, and the basic idea of having compassion for others and things like that, and realizing that when things are put together, they tend to come apart eventually is like it's not terrible, but it's also not like nearly as profound as they make it out to be. But in the end, there's this vagary that's always there. And what you have is an inability, because you don't believe in good or bad, you don't believe that there's any separation between teacher and student, and teacher and student is anyone higher in the hierarchy than you are. Is kind of your teacher, because the reverence for the teacher is extended to anyone who's senior, right? So you have more wisdom than me. You're more senior than I am. And like I said, you spend like 15 minutes more sitting than somebody else and you're automatically senior. And the reason why this matters is because then the kind of vagary that's used to protect the teacher from ever having to say anything that's actually true or to be held down to anything. This allows him the ability to contradict himself, to sort of change what he says, to be inconsistent, and he can just make up more shit to cover it up. Well, that's what the senior teachers do, and that's what the junior teachers do, and that's what the administrators do, and that's what the meditation instructors do, and that's what the person doing T-prep does to the person that they're teaching T-prep to. We learn this behavior by watching it, and we all kind of do it, but it's all based on an absolute lack of boundaries. There's no way to create boundaries. I got an email this week from somebody who told a story that was not sexual assault per se, but was just a creepy kind of being just a little too familiar, just a little too close. I don't really know you, but I'm gonna, kiss you and greet you as though you're almost a lover kind of thing, but not really. And it was kind of normal for that to happen. And so this is where people want to hear constant stories of the horrible, awful things that were going on. But those things happened some. And when you look at it sort of as a whole, it was quite a bit. But a lot of times things were just kind of ordinary and boring. But there was this kind of creepy, boundaryless quality that was kind of often there, especially between men and women, especially between senior men and less senior women, though it definitely happened both ways, and anybody in Shambhala could definitely abuse power. And a lot of people didn't abuse their power. That's the thing, is a lot of people didn't. And that's part of the heartbreak in this situation. So I actually wrote down some notes here, by the way. Oh, yeah, so let's talk about me a little bit. So I was 21 when I first went in Shambhala stuff, and I didn't really drink at the time. I had taken to, because I was into the hippie thing, so I had taken to drinking the occasional Sam Smith's oatmeal stout, an imperial pint, an 18-ounce beer, half a 40. And I would drink one of those once every couple of weeks, something like that, and I wouldn't get a buzz at all. And that was kind of my thing, but I was kind of more into smoking weed. And then sort of we showed up, and Shambhala, of course, everybody was drinking. And the first summer that I was there was this warrior assembly that was epic. And it was notorious for years afterwards, even among Shambhala people. But for us, it was one of our first experiences of seeing this stuff. And these people, we didn't know what they were doing exactly, but they would go and they would do stroke practice all day long. And then they would have a formal dining or banquet, because formal dining was one level and a banquet was the next level. Because that's one aspect of Shambhala culture, right, is the just over the top formality and the 27 toasts while your food freezes, and the everybody talking about how great everybody else is all the time, and then making the occasional joke. There's that sort of social culture of things that was kind of a mess. But I'm not going to probably focus on that as much today. But there was but these people had these events, and then it would turn into often a dance party almost every night, and they drank such excessive amounts. It was just empty boxes of sake, several empty boxes of sake, and the boxes are what 18 liters or 3 gallons or 5 gallons or so. Maybe 3 gallons, 2 or 3 gallons. They're big. And they were just tearing through this stuff at an epic rate. This is 1995. It's important to keep in mind that things did change over time for various reasons. The community got bigger, and I think a big part of it was that there was a higher level of scrutiny on the community from law enforcement and regulatory agencies. So, for example, when I lived at Shambhala Mountain Center, it was one of the last times where they actually paid people less than minimum wage, because finally they, after the scandals, like I think now they pay people minimum wage at worst, because they have to, because somebody's actually watching. When I first went there, like the health department was, not really giving them too hard of a time, and they would push harder and harder, and Shambhala would sort of push back. And so there was, in the 70s, there was like almost no probably oversight. By the time we got to the 90s, there was a fair bit more, and there were some things in place, but it was still overall pretty creepy, I think, especially for young women and older girls at Shambhala Mountain Center. And the drunkenness, like the underage drinking at that point was like pretty normal, pretty common. It was sort of like it was one of those things where it was like officially not against the rules, but but everybody knew, and it was kind of like a nudge and a wink sort of thing. But so anyway, so I didn't drink much at all that year, and then I think it was the next year that I started to get into the alcohol and the culture and the alcohol culture. And by the time I made it to Dechen Choling in the fall of 96, I was a pretty regular drinker at that point, drinking a lot of wine, a lot of beer. And it was just kind of part of the thing. It was like you just drank, and you drank and you had these cavalier attitudes about sexuality and intimacy. And I never did tell the story about towards the end, whatever. So towards the end, when I was at Casa Werma, I remember having a conversation with a Shastri who was teaching one of the programs, and I told him that I had sort of come to understand that I really kind of disliked that culture, and that the cavalier attitudes towards drinking and sexuality were actually kind of damaging, and I felt resentful about it. Because I felt like I was very young when I came in, and I, didn't have a connection with my family. My mother was dead. My father and I didn't get along, and I was looking for an alternative. And these people, sort of had their way of saying, this is, we have some stuff to offer. Do you want it? Do you want to give this a try? And kind of gradually gave us the impression that they actually had the truth, the highest teachings available to man that will allow you to become enlightened in one lifetime. And on top of it, we're going to create an enlightened society as an example to all sentient beings. Now, remember, these people make these claims, and then they dodge these claims. This is because of the lack of clarity in the language that's used throughout Shambhala. There is no definitive anything. And so because of that, they're able to wiggle out of just about anything. And that's why you have dumbass trying to make claims like, oh, I have a drinking problem, that's why I did these things. Or saying things like, Westerners just don't understand how to separate the teacher from the person, which is the most ridiculous thing you could ever say. You can say shit like that because it's built into the language. And I'm not saying that it was done intentionally, but it is kind of like, it's a pseudoscientific system that actually vagary and lack of precision in the language is actually built into it. And I think it's, Tibet has a really relatively high IQ populace. And I think that it's a really good way to keep people busy is to give them tons and tons and tons of categories to memorize and all sorts of shit to think about, so that you keep that analytical mind churning, but you're actually never going to get anywhere because it's completely imprecise and it's actually pseudoscientific. But the thing is that flexibility that's created by that, the teacher has that. the senior teacher has that, the junior teacher has that, and everybody down the hierarchy has that. And then they can create a situation of lack of boundaries and lack of accountability with their students. So that's why you can't fix it. And it's the same people. You can't actually fix it because it's baked into the cake. And so anyway, I was talking to this Shastri about this, and I was saying these things, and he said to me, he's a student of the Vidyadhara. He said, you know what? I hear what you're saying, and you're right. You're actually right. This is a problem, and it's something that needs to change, that still needs to change, and the way that we present ourselves is not a good thing, and so on and so forth. And I just mentioned that because several months later, he was removed as a Shastri for having an affair with one of his students. I mean, come on. It's just unbelievable. So anyway, drinking. There were a number of times when I wanted to quit drinking, and I actually read the texts. And I read things about drinking the deathless Amrita and all this sort of pro-alcohol stuff. And I was like, well, I'm not really going to be, I can't do it. My heart goes to this. And so I actually probably kept drinking. I started drinking because of Shambhala's promotion of alcohol, and I kept drinking because of Shambhala's promotion of alcohol. And it wasn't until after I left Shambhala that I was able relatively easily to quit drinking because I no longer had this cultural pressure. And drinking was never, in fact, any good for me, even though Dumbass Senior claimed that it could be used as medicine. And maybe we'll go over that at some point. So let's see here. So we've covered a lot of those things. We've covered almost everything. So now the question becomes, well, okay, so they make this argument that well, you know, Dumbass apologized a bunch of times, and Shambhala has separated from him. So Shambhala, though it's trying to carry on Trungpa's Shambhala teachings without doing anything tantric. I don't know how you're trying to do that, but I understand. Because I understand what it feels like to have lost that. And I understand wanting to make it work. So I don't bear any negative thoughts towards people who have tried to reform Shambhala, but I would like to invite you over to the dark side because it's just not possible. And, you know, we can try and figure out, you can try to figure out, not necessarily with me, I'm not starting an organization here, but try to figure out how to live in a good way without that. But it's just not redeemable. So has it all changed? Has it all gotten better? So by the time we get to like 1995 or so, things are a little better. You know, it's definitely not as wild and crazy as it was in the 80s. Those and in the 70s and the 80s. Those people who were totally wild are now 50, so some of them have calmed down a little bit. Not all of them. Some of them are still hitting on young people who are now even more younger than they were. But did it get any better? I don't remember. I think it was like around 1999 or so. I remember a case where somebody made out with or did something sexual to, I don't know exactly what extent, with a girl, 13 or 14-year-old girl. And I know that the police, I don't think, were called. I think there might have been a lawsuit that happened about that afterwards too, but I don't think the police were initially called, and they just kicked the guy out. So they hadn't learned anything yet. And I got a lot of trouble about just taking the word of the lawyers. You know, not a lot. I heard from one guy who claimed that the lawyers were unreliable in that report, and some things can be misreported and so on and so forth. But the reason why I believe what's in there is in part because I actually know some of the people and some of the stories. And I could recognize like 3 or 4 of those stories from my own experience. I didn't realize the totality of them, but I was like, oh wait, this person was interacting with this person and this person. Oh, I know who those are. Oh shit, that's how it turned out, kind of thing. I didn't know everything, but I know that those things happened. And it did happen too much in Shambhala. And let's not forget the exploitation of labor, the financial abuse, all of these other things. You can't forget the whole context, because it's easy to point to one thing and be like, oh, well, 16, it was legal, and then just ignore everything else. But it all starts to add up. So there was that one in 1995 when I was up there. Another one that happened while I was a Rusung. This is just an example of the avoidance of accountability. This isn't so egregious. Nothing that egregious that I know of happened while I was the Rusung. Right before I was the Rusung, there was Ariel's story that was in the Denver Post article. That happened while I was there, but I wasn't aware of the details until I read the article. I played a very tiny role in that situation, but I wasn't let in on the details because of the secrecy thing. But I can understand how it played out that way. But this story is from my own experience. When I was a Rusung, there was a Datun that was presided over by an Acharya, Emily Bauer, and John Barbieri was the director. Michael Gaynor was the operations director at the time. And during the mid-Datun party, a meditation instructor was caught making out with his meditation student. And so this wasn't like coercive necessarily. It was, it seemed to be the kind of thing where they liked each other and they just hit it off. Now, already when you're in that meditation instructor and student dynamic, there's already a little bit of a problem. And the chances that you have this attraction that doesn't actually add up later is a problem, is a potential problem. But it didn't seem like the kind of thing where they were close to the same age, and it wasn't like one was super senior and the other one was super junior. There weren't all of these problems, but it was still inappropriate, right? And there was no assault, there was nothing so bad, but they were making out and they shouldn't have been making out, and the teacher in that situation needed to be held accountable to some degree, one would think, because in order to prevent these kind of things from happening, there have to be clear boundaries. And that can sometimes mean that people who would normally get along maybe should stay away from each other just in order to protect those boundaries. If you're running an organization like Shambhala, you kind of have to do that. But Shambhala had no boundaries. And it never, and again, it cannot have boundaries. But so anyway, this happened, and there was, I don't remember how it came out, and then I got alerted about it as the Rusung, and there were a couple of other people involved, one of the people in the programs department or something, and then there was a discussion about it with the Acharya. And usually the thing is you default to the teacher in this situation. So even as the Rusung, it was like you default to the senior teacher, because the teaching part of the hierarchy was considered higher in some way, even though they often said the military or the administration types were kind of on an even keel. In reality, the teacher was supreme in Shambhala. And so there was a discussion with him and the Acharya, and he told the story, and then he left. And I think I was sitting there with the Acharya and one or two other people, and the general reaction was, well, he's a good guy. I know him. I don't think he would do anything untowards. And so I think we should just and he said he's sorry, so maybe we should just let it go. And I was just totally outraged. I was like, no, you cannot do that. That sets a terrible precedent. Obviously, there's been terrible precedent after terrible precedent after terrible precedent in the past. But I was just like, there's no freaking way we can do that. I think Dan Hesse might have been involved in this too. Like, I think he came up with the bullshit solution. So there was another person, a woman who was involved, who also was on my side with the no, you cannot do nothing. And it was the two of us that pushed that doing nothing was not an option, that something had to happen. And so what these assholes came up with is a confession ceremony where they made it up. You know, it's like he had to like give them something and then like they gave it back to him kind of thing. And he confessed that he had broken his vow as a meditation instructor. And that was it. And it was this stupid little ceremony. He did get a good talking to from Michael Gaynor, you know, who apparently I've heard some, I know him I knew him a lot, and I've heard some bad stuff since leaving, as far as his relationship to the survivors and victims of Shambhala abuse, but I don't know the details. But yeah, so he gave him a good talking to, and then they had and I'm pretty sure Dan Hesse came up with this idiotic, and I might be wrong if it was somebody different, but this idiotic confession ceremony, and then it was just like, you know, off we go. And I remember talking to the woman who had, you know, advocated for more accountability along with me afterwards, and she was like, fucking confession ceremony? Are we ever going to learn anything? And I was like, I don't know. And the never learning anything thing is actually really important in understanding this broader cultural picture, right? So another thing, when I was a Rusung, there was one year where in the summer we had, I think it was, and I'm not exaggerating, like it was like somewhere between 15 and 17 times we had to call an ambulance in the summer. And like I think I had gotten an assistant at that point. So there were two of us on the full-time staff. And my technique was to inspire a big group of Kosung volunteers to do all of the different things that needed to get done. Other Rusungs ran around like a crazy person the whole time doing everything themselves. There were different approaches for the basic problem. Now, keep in mind, whatever your opinions may be about the Kosung, that my responsibility was the safety and well-being of the people and the property and so on and so forth. And I didn't have to I did have a domestic abuse situation where actually a man got hit by a woman, and we didn't handle that especially well either. But like, I didn't have a lot of those kind of problems, but I did have a whole lot of medical and fire stuff going on. I also had there were 2 fires while I was there, and 17 ambulances in a single summer. There were more. And we didn't have resources. And every time I asked for something, it was almost always a no. And so I had to continually narrow down the resources that I was asking for. And it was like enough two-way radios to communicate. It was like the most basic stuff. And there was no wish list. There were so many things I wish I would have had in order to do that. And I was constantly in a state of paranoia that somebody was going to get mortally wounded or something horrible was going to happen. And I was talking to Jesse Grimes, who was the head of the Kosung, and we were going over some of these things. And now he was the head of the Dorje Kosung, right? So like, that's a fair bit of power there. And he said, I think somebody has to die before they're going to take us seriously. And so what's going on there, right? They won't put the resources towards making sure that people are safe. We won't have clear boundaries. So we cannot actually enforce the rules because the rules change depending on your status in the hierarchy. And at the same time, you're constantly creating bigger and bigger projects. And so everybody, because they're indoctrination is towards worshiping the guru and fulfilling the guru's vision, again, and I've said this multiple times, the individuals then become completely expendable. And so if somebody gets burned out, you put somebody else in their place. If somebody gets abused and harmed and traumatized, just throw them overboard and keep driving the boat. And it's just never going to stop. It's not going to stop. So they knew, right? The leadership knew that the place was dangerous. The leadership knew that we were calling ambulances all the time. The leadership knew that we didn't have the resources. But the leadership felt obliged to fulfill the vision of Dumbass. And in order to do that, like when they built all those buildings at Shambhala Mountain, Drala Mountain Center, I'm going to start calling it Drala Mountain Center so that modern people who don't know Shambhala know what I'm talking about. So when they built all those buildings, there's this famous story because it shows the wrathfulness of the enlightened dumbass. And it's where he was talking to Walcher about the details of how to do what needed to get done. And there was some hemming and hawing about how difficult it was. And he said, well, if you don't do it, if you can't do it, I'll find somebody who can. And so it's like, this is going to happen no matter how unrealistic it is. And people used to talk about the sort of, because they have this vast mind, they don't think about worldly things as we do. And it's our job to think of that relative world stuff. So when they have a vision, they say, just do it. And we have to make it happen. And to be fair, we pulled off some outrageous shit. Like building that stupa, that's crazy. That they managed to do that. But how did they do it? That's where they spent all their money. And then they didn't spend it on, being decent. They didn't spend it on giving minimum wage to the employees. They didn't spend it because the people are expendable. The people are entirely expendable. And that's why you can't fix it. You can't fix it because that lack of boundaries is actually built into the entire ideology. It's built into the methodology. It's built into the whole thing. So that's why I said burn it down. Burn it down and use it as fuel. Sell your Shambhala Center. Donate that to preventing harm. Because you're not going to create an enlightened society and you're not doing anybody any actual good. The people who got out of it unscathed and are just comforted because they're not willing to let go of their delusion, you boomer Shambhala people who are still in it are not my audience. But people are still being harmed, and I mean actively right now. So one of the things that came to my attention between the last video and now are a couple of sexual assaults that occurred at Drala Mountain Center, I think in 2023. And I heard about these from someone, and I have heard them corroborated from someone else, and I'm not going to go into more detail, but in both cases, and these happened within a 6-month period of time, and it was only about 3 years ago. In both cases, someone who had status, a male who had some sort of status within Shambhala, assaulted a woman who had a lower status. And in both cases, Drala Mountain Center protected the perpetrators and treated the victims very badly. And both cases were charged, and both cases were convicted of lesser convictions of the original charge. So there's a public record of these things. This is not speculation. These are convicted criminal acts. I don't know what the final convictions were. I think in both cases I don't know if they were charged with sexual assault or rape, but that was just a couple of years ago. And they haven't learned. So this new care and conduct process, or whatever it's called, rape and cover-up process, or whatever they call it, is entirely dysfunctional. It doesn't work at Shambhala Mountain Center. It doesn't work within Shambhala. If that's not enough, I came across a public Facebook group, and I'll actually link to the group, probably in a pinned comment, to a post that just came out about 2 weeks ago. So about a week after I released the last video, talking about the situation in Halifax right now. And I want to share that with you so that you understand why I'm so adamant about these things. Burn it down and use it as fuel. Help the people. There are still active lawsuits going on, and these people are being tormented in ways that I don't like to think about. So this is a post from January 2nd. Okay, so that's just a few weeks ago. It's unbelievably sad to see what has come of the Shambhala Buddhist community in the Halifax Shambhala Center. After so many abuse scandals and suicides of members, they're still covering up new abuses and protecting abusers. I left the community many years ago after finding out about the abuses taking place. But over the last few years, I tried to re-engage with the Halifax Shambhala Center, seeing signs that things had changed, because they're really good at the surface. Let's see here. But as I became more involved, I witnessed several people go through their new conflict resolution system, the gaslighting system, and can report that it is business as usual. Abuse, protection of abusers, and attacking those who are abused or who don't toe the line. And that's exactly it. That's the pattern that plays out over and over and over again. And you see it in everything that happened in that report. You see it in everything that happened in the Project Sunshine reports. You see it in everything that was reported on in the Kusum letter. You see it in everywhere. Someone of lower status is abused by someone of higher status. The person who is of lower status is treated as the problem, as insane, as ruining hierarchy, as ruining harmony, as being a liar, while the person who aggressed against that person is treated as as protected. And it plays out over and over and over again, and it won't stop because there are no clear boundaries, and there can be no clear boundaries because of the nature of the community. So going on, toe the line. Having spoken out about abuse, and here we go. Now this is like you call this an ally, I guess. Having spoken out about abuse, I have been targeted and forced from the community. Fool me once, shame on you. Yes, it's terribly embarrassing to have returned and believed that the same people who covered up abuses for decades would be capable of turning a new leaf. But hey, man, I understand why you try. I do understand why you try. What is worse than embarrassment, and what is the reason I share this now, is that over the last few years, former community members have heard me invite them back to the Shambhala Center, assured that things had changed. But they need to know that I was wrong. I have put them in danger by vouching for a newfound safety in Shambhala. I owe each and every one of you an apology. Be safe, everyone. If you want to talk about this, feel free to DM me. I've found this to have brought up a great deal of the trauma relating to previous abuses of which close friends have been victims, so I might not answer immediately, but I promise I will reply as soon as I can. And there's a lot of comments here that are worth reading, and I want to just touch in on a couple of these. So this one's interesting, because this is a person who's more of a supporter, not a Shambhala person. But I think that this response is really interesting. That's named a real issue. When something bad comes down from the top in these organizations, which are supposed to be about promoting good things, compassion, love, nonviolence, peace, we feel betrayed. Well, we have been betrayed. And we tend to focus exclusively on that and forget the good things, especially anything good done by those same people. People are so complex, with good and bad within all at the same time, and the best of the world, blah, blah, blah. I'm not defending the people in leadership who do bad things. That absolutely has to be dealt with. I'm a spiritual leader in the Christian tradition, and one of the first things we were taught is to do no harm. And if a leader does harm, then it has to be dealt with decisively and in favor of protecting the people harmed. Imagine if Shambhala did that. Imagine. Not the one doing the harm, but I believe we should see them with some compassion, etc., etc. Okay, but the response. So this is the response from the original poster. Thank you, or whatever. It gives the name. You guys can read the names. I'm not going to read the names. I don't see any point. I tried to relate to this internally with the organization for almost a year. I am writing this because it has become clear to me that there is no possibility of saving the organization. People who covered up terrible, horrific things are still in positions of power. People who are relatively new to positions of power are replicating the same patterns of deceptions, cover-ups, and attacking anyone who speaks out. And this is the thing. You learn it from the culture. Right? So we all learned to be vague and to be able to bullshit in that way. And we all learned that the guru's plan was more important than anything else. And we all learned to protect the harmony of the community over the well-being of any individual. And that's why somebody who's been in the community for 6 months does the same bullshit. Because they're emulating the culture. And this is why you need to burn it down. Not literally, but stop going to Shambhala. Stop giving them your money. Discourage anyone you know from ever setting foot inside of a Shambhala center. If you're a teacher in Shambhala, proclaim that it's broken. Admit it to yourself. That's what we need to have happen here in order for there to be some sort of success. So continuing. Cover-ups and tagging anyone who speaks out. And perhaps most sadly, I've seen the original students are simply of an age and culture that accepts abuse as tolerable. Those students have never really handed off power, and their culture remains dominant. And I do think that that's true to a certain degree. Like there's a different understanding of boundaries that's just sort of really important to maintain. And this is tricky because we're kind of figuring this out. And I'm not, I don't want to get into the details of like what is the best way to handle these kind of things because it's a hard problem. It's a genuinely hard problem because, any legal issue is kind of hard to deal with. But when it's something this sensitive, when we talk about abuse and abuse of power, it gets very, very tricky as sort of handling it well, to be fair to both sides and to not re-traumatize the potential victim is a hard problem. But it is true that the attitudes about abuse were pretty cavalier 30, 40 years ago. Anyway, as you said, I shouldn't forget the goodness of people. When they have treated me with viciousness, even when they have treated me with viciousness, I don't think these folks are trying to hurt anyone. What I've observed is that they are stuck in a state of mind, a very strong habit, you could say, where they disregard abuse, cover up anything they see as controversial, and pursue people as enemies if they feel threatened. Sane people don't choose to behave this way. It's a sickness. These are not my words, but they sound a lot like what I was saying, don't they? And finally, by speaking out, I am going to be attacked, even by Sangha members who were once friends. I accept this as a price of warning people. For months, the staff and leaders of Shambhala asked me not to speak out about what I was seeing. Asked me not to speak. Is he? I would point out that if they don't want abuse talked about publicly, then we Shambhala shouldn't be facilitating abuse. That line of reasoning wasn't remotely understood by those in leadership. Now those same people are approaching my friends and members of my family to tell them that I am a liar. That happened to any of you? Let me know in the comments. And since I'm not around to defend myself, I expect their lies and slander are the predominant view internally. Meaning, yeah, people believe it. And I know a bunch of people that's happened to. It's normal. It's normal. This is all to say that I don't share this lightly. To speak up is going to be a personal tragedy. A number of prominent people at the Halifax Center will make sure of that. And then I want to slide down. There's another comment or two. This is an interesting one. This is from actually the original poster's father, I believe. All this breaks my heart, and I salute your bravery. I will support you in every way I can. It hurts me to have a leader at Shambhala tell me you are lying and acting irrationally when I showed up to discuss this with members of the board of Shambhala International. He tried to act as a controller to keep me from truth-telling! ! This person was someone I have known for 50 years and thought was my Sangha, but now I realize I have been betrayed. This person was also for years in a position to have stopped or at least exposed many harmful actions of Sakyong Mipham in Halifax, yet he consistently supported Mipham. Shameful and unacceptable then and now. I agree. Now this is an interesting one. This is an interesting discussion because while this is all going on, people are trying to rebuild Shambhala, right? People are trying to rebuild, but you can't. You're only going to recreate the same thing over and over again. And this is why Shambhala is actually irredeemable. So let's look at this one. This is another commenter and an exchange with the original poster. Sad to hear. Curious about details and such, but a bit busy myself at the moment. I'll try to find a quiet moment to reach out when I can. There are people trying to put the DK, that's Dorje Kosong, back together in a better way. But that can't be honest without dealing with this honestly. Agree. I have some involvement with them and would like to be as much of a pain in the ass as I have to about this to make sure that they don't ignore it. And it's kind of like, good luck, man. I know that guy, by the way. He's a good person. Beautiful singing voice, too. I think. But, like, dude, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. Build something parallel, like join a gym. Like, I don't know what. Find some people, become a community, but it's not going to work. So anyway, the response here, and some of the people leading that Dorje Kosong effort continue to be involved in cover-ups and his legacy of abuse. I'm sorry to report. The response, sad to hear, but good to know. You can't have the larger ideals if the smaller ones get compromised. That's kind of it's like building a house without a foundation. Yeah. Anyway. So the question, right, is, well, everything's fixed now. Everything's better, people say. Maybe we don't need to burn it down. But you have to burn it down, folks. You have to let go. And I know it's hard. I've been through it. I continue to go through it. I think I may talk about that soon if I get it together. But because of the vagary that's built in to the entire structure, right? No one can ever nail down the teacher. And that's the claim, right? That's the teaching itself, is that, ooh, I can't be nailed down. I'm so clever. But it's also a perfect setup for abuse. And so are there teachers out there that are actually like teaching something that's not abusive? Maybe. Is it actually profound though? I have my doubts. I really have my doubts. I think there is something to it, but I don't think it's really anything special. And what I mean by that is that it fits into the category of religious mythologies that have evolved all around the world, and that there are certain aspects of human wisdom and a whole bunch of cultural bullshit sort of all piled together in there. And you're not going to Vajra hell, so don't worry about it. So you can safely walk away, and hell, walk away and build community with the people you walked away with who are still decent, and if a little bit of meditation helps, maybe you can throw that in there. But you can't redeem Shambhala. It's irredeemable. And the reason why it's irredeemable is because a total lack of clarity, precision, decidability, and boundaries are built into the context and the teaching. And you're not going to get around that. So if my tone was a little harsh last time, I was pretty angry for those people. And I don't mean to literally burn it down, but I do mean, if you pay dues to Shambhala, stop right now. Go cancel your dues right after you watch this video. Stop going. Discourage other people from going. And if you live near a center that owns its own building and you're a former member, encourage them to sell the building and donate it. You could probably find someone down the street from the Shambhala Center to give the money to who would do better with it. But just put an end to it. So thank you all for watching. I have a lot more to talk about. I've got a lot of topics that I want to cover. I'm going to do my best to keep things coming out. I have to go back for another surgical procedure this Wednesday. By surgical, they're not cutting me open, but I pay a surgical copay on my insurance, so I guess it's called surgery. So this is my third surgery in 3 weeks. And I should be much better after that. But thank you all for watching, and thank you to everybody who's written me. Some of you I haven't gotten back to because I've been sick and busy. I've heard so many stories. I wish I could share with you exactly what I've understood from these stories, and I'm trying to figure out a way to say those things. But it's very, very challenging, and I just want to say to everybody who has shared a story with me, whether you asked me not to share it or not, thank you. It's becoming very clear that this is actually a really simple situation. It's simple and complicated. It's simple in that I don't think this abuse can ever end in Shambhala. So like what should happen is clear. And then it's complicated as far as understanding how it happens and preventing it on a larger scale. And that's what I'm still hoping to unpack over time. So, if you're picking up what I'm putting down, please bear with me. Please like the video. It helps a lot. The last video got over 2,000 views, so that's increasing. I hope that my quality of delivery is getting better and that I am a little more accessible to people who aren't familiar with Shambhala. I appreciate your suggestions. I won't always take them, but I still appreciate them, and I do try to incorporate a lot of things that people have said into the videos. And be patient. This is going to take a while. I think I have to do like 20, 25 more videos before I even start to really express what I want to express. So share your story. I'm still open. If anybody wants to be interviewed on camera or who wants to share your story, I will share my platform with you. And I think that it would be much more powerful if more and more people spoke up. Like I said in the last one, we're not done, folks. It's, for some reason, Shambhala is still trying to survive. And I don't think that that's such a good idea. Anyway, have a great snowstorm, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.